Stories of Vision Loss. This episode features Wayne.
I've been blessed with this incredible gift to be able to see people from the inside out rather than the outside in. I'm Wayne Tuttle. I was born in 1955, so I'll let you do the math and see how old I am. I was born in a small Ontario, Canada town. I'm actually so far north that I have waved to Santa Claus to get to my house. So in the wintertime, when you put money in the parking meter, you can also put money in a block heater.
So I guess you don't need a guide dog, you need sled dogs.
Yeah, exactly. I was born with retinitis pigmentosa. Growing up, I thought everybody had trouble seeing at nighttime. Every time it started to get dark, I would struggle if we were playing outside with my friends, tag or hide and go seek. That was a real challenge from time to time. And I started wearing glasses in grade 9, probably 13, 14 years old. And it wasn't until 1975 that I started really noticing a significant change in my vision. And it wasn't probably until 1984 when I was finally diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa. And I went to college and studied radio and television communications. I've had a varied career over my life. After graduation with broadcasting, I originally wanted to get into editing. I was behind the scenes. I wasn't really interested in being an on-air personality. And back in those days, the technology was not there for people who were blind and visually impaired. So it was very difficult for someone to get into the broadcast industry if they were doing editing because it was all physical. So you really had to rely on your vision to do the edits on tape and that sort of thing. And at that point, I had to pivot. I went back to an original job before I left to go to college, and I worked in a factory. And they would make bridesmaids gowns as well as bridal wear. And I was actually in the cutting room. So I was cutting the materials with these electric saws and that sort of thing.
It's so funny that you went from the radio, television, and film, and you stopped doing that because you had a hard time cutting the film, and you went straight into cutting bridal gowns. You went from cutting one material to another.
Yeah, that was a real challenge. And of course, at that time, my employer didn't know that I had visual issues. So it was very challenging. Like, just picture the cutting material, not just one piece of fabric. We would cut 50, 60, 70 layers of bride gowns or bridesmaids gowns, and it was basically you were following a pattern, and it was a real challenge, absolutely. But it got to the point where I didn't want to continue living in a small community. I wanted to get out and look at life differently. And one day I decided to look in the Toronto newspaper. It was called the Star at that time. There was an ad for a clerk working right on the Toronto Stock Exchange. I applied for the job and I got an interview. And at that time, I was still driving, even though I was legally blind. In 1976, I actually drove a car during the day till 1984. So I drove from our small town, which was about a 2.5 hour drive to Toronto, and I got the job on the spot. 2 weeks later, I packed up my station wagon, moved to Toronto. From there, I worked for the Toronto Stock Exchange for about 2 years, and I was hired on by one of the largest brokerage firms, and I started climbing the ladder to success and continuing advancing my career.
Yeah. Well, the other thought I had was you mentioned that you were driving, though you were diagnosed in the 70s, you were driving through the 80s.
Yeah.
Oh, I know that's a difficult thing for a lot of people to make that decision to stop driving. So how was that for you?
Uh, Oh, devastating. Absolutely devastating. I was 17 years old when I received my driver's license, and I just absolutely loved the ability to just get up and go anytime I wanted to, not having to rely on anybody. And my biggest problem was I was so stubborn. I did not want to give up my independence, and I paid the price. During the day, I was relatively okay. At nighttime, forget it. There's no way I could. The sun started to go down. I had to be off the road. I took too many chances, and it came back to bite me. 1984, I was living in another town outside of Toronto. I was commuting from a place called Newmarket, Ontario to Toronto, and it was a weekend, and I needed a tool. I needed to borrow a tool from a friend of mine who just lived about 20 minutes away from me. I backed out of my driveway, put the car in first gear, and before I got into second gear, I hit a 9-year-old little girl. And that was the day that convinced me to hang up my license. I was warned. I did a lot of volunteer work with the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, and I was warned by an individual who said, "Wayne, you've got to give it up." He said it was too late for me. Because of his stubbornness, he killed somebody. Mm. In my particular case, yes, the little girl, she was injured. So I'm sure she will not forget that for the rest of her life. I certainly think about it a lot.
Yeah. Thank God she survived.
Absolutely. It was my stupidity that I kept doing it. I still drive a snowmobile in the wintertime, obviously. If we're out on a lake or a trail that's relatively straight, I have a family member behind me. We've developed different techniques so I can steer the snowmobile around corners and stuff like that.
Do you have like a walkie-talkie or a Bluetooth speakers that you talk to each other?
I've used that in the past, but most of the time it's tactile. You know, they want me to turn a little bit to the right, they'll keep tapping me on my right shoulder.
Okay, so they're on the same snowmobile.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought they were like in a different one behind you.
I have been out by myself, but it has to be an open area, like on a frozen lake that's safe, and I go just by sound. I do all kinds of different things that are out of the norm. I was a scuba diver at 10 years old. My stepfather, he owned the dive shop. So I was taught how to scuba dive back then. And I hung up my diving license at the age of 16. And I always dreamt of being back in the water again. I was asked to participate in a accessibility documentary called AMI TV. And they were doing a documentary on who was the most accessible city in Canada. I said, I'd like to scuba dive. We'll get back to you. They actually found an organization out of Thorold, Ontario, and they train people with disabilities how to scuba dive. So that portion of the documentary is me getting back into the water after 40 years.
Wow, that's exciting.
It was the most emotional part of a documentary that I've ever participated in, actually taking it from a swimming pool to an open water dive, being down 30 feet for 28 minutes and experiencing a different world again. It's just out of this world.
Wow. How did you access the gear? Like, could you tell how much oxygen you had left?
Well, when you're being trained as a scuba diver with a disability, they not only have a dive buddy, they have two dive buddies. One dive buddy looks after me, and the other dive buddy looks after my dive buddy. Mm. So the dive buddy who's looking after me, we're trained in tactile signals. So for example, if we wanted to go down, they would grab my left arm and put their pointer finger on the back of my hand and push down. Mm. when we were signaling to go back up, they would put their thumb underneath my palm to signal that we were going up.
Mm.
Things like clearing your mask of water or to acclimatize to the water pressure, they would touch my nose
Wow.
just to check if I'm okay. They would squeeze my left muscle.
Yeah, that communication reminds me a lot of deaf-blind haptic sign language.
Yes, absolutely.
And did you feel comfortable, like you could communicate well throughout the experience?
Oh, I was so excited. It was just unforgettable.
So, what did you see down there?
Well, when we went down to the bottom, I was able to walk around some of the areas and get a tactile feeling of what the bottom felt like. There was some areas that were very weedy,
Hmm.
so it was like going through weeds that were probably taller than me.
Wow.
There was areas where it was just all sand. It was very sandy. They also had how would I describe it? Think of 6 hula hoops, vertical,
Hmm.
but these hula hoops were probably 6 foot round. So what they would do is they would bring you up to the first hula hoop, and you had the ability to go through the hula hoops by yourself, and they would meet you at the end. So it would be a good 20, 30 feet that you actually were on your own.
Mm, that's a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm imagining it like a moonwalk.
Oh, for sure. You are in a different world. Like it is so unnatural to be in an environment that it's hard to believe because you're breathing this gas,
Hmm.
but you're in their environment.
Mm.
And there was so many fish. Like they would bump into my mask and they would bump into my hands if I was moving my hands up and that sort of thing.
Wow, that's so cool.
And I would literally just reach out and
Wow,
attempt to grab them. It was pretty funny.
what a beautiful experience. I want to go back. You mentioned that I think you said you restore vintage snowmobiles.
Yes.
So tell me more about that. How did you get into that?
Huh.
I guess living in Canada.
Yeah, I think I started when I was in high school. I took a small engines repair, and my first snowmobile I worked on was a 1969 Olympic Skidoo. That was, I think, my prized possession for a number of years. I now own two. I still call them vintage because the one's a 94 and one's a 97.
Oh no, that's vintage now.
That's the newest ones that I've ever had. Before that, the newest was the 1984, but I've done mostly 70s and 60s snow machines. It's a little bit more challenging now because the way things have changed with snowmobiles is not like it used to be when I first started. They're more sophisticated, so
Yeah, they're more like electrical and digital now than they are mechanical, right?
yeah, some of them are. Like, I mean, I've looked up YouTube videos, learned about different things like that.
Yeah. So I want to go back to being under the water. You mentioned that you're a Titanic historian, and sounds fascinating to me. Tell me about that.
Yes, I've been fascinated with the Titanic ever since I was a kid. Back in the day, we didn't have the internet. So if you wanted to learn about anything, it was all about going to the library, taking out books and a number of documentaries, not a lot, but as far back as even a month after the sinking in 1912.
Oh, really? They made a movie like a month later?
Yeah,
Wow.
it was absolutely 1 month later. In fact, one of the survivors wore the same outfit she wore the night that she was rescued.
Oh my
But
God.
over the years, I really got involved with it. I think when Dr. Ballard found the Titanic in 1984, there was a surge of more and more information coming out via the internet. So since then, I've belonged to a number of platforms, the Titanic Historical Society, Titanic Encyclopedia. I do presentations usually every year around April about the build and how it came about, the sinking and that sort of thing. I'm also a collector. I have some artifacts. I have some replicas. My entire living room, dining room is almost like a museum.
What sort of artifacts do you have?
I actually have a physical piece of the Titanic.
How did you get your hands on that?
Surfing the internet, you go on, for example, eBay, you will find all kinds of so-called artifacts, but you have to be extremely careful when it comes to that, even though people say it comes with a certificate of authentication. Don't believe it.
How do you verify the authenticity?
Me personally, I will share photos with the group, and there are a number of experienced people out there that can really look into it to make sure it is legitimate. You have to be extremely careful when it comes to that sort of thing. I've got first class binoculars. I gave out a pearl set of almost like opera glasses for first class women. The men had the binoculars in brass. So I've got the pearl ones. I've got a second class smoking pipe that's very ornate, life jacket.
Wow, it's fascinating. I love those very specific hobbies like that. You can really delve deeply,
Yeah,
literally.
yeah.
I haven't asked the question yet, how does vision loss fit into your story? You shared about RP and how it affected you throughout your life, but do you want to share anything more about how it fits into your story or thoughts for anyone out there?
Well, I find, like I mentioned earlier, about being a sighted man in a blind man's body,
Mm.
I've never looked at it as a disability. In fact, I treat it more so as a benefit.
In what way?
Well, in one of my presentations that I give, I mentioned that I've been blessed with this incredible gift to be able to see people from the inside out rather than the outside in.
Mm.
Because I think a lot of times people make judgments of what they see. Like the old saying, judge a book by its cover. When you're blind, you don't have that opportunity. So you're less likely to be judgmental.
Yeah. You still have a first impression, it's just not a visual one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I always say that no matter what adversity or challenge that you face in life, just find it within yourself how you can do things and stop making excuses. I can't.
So tell me more about what you're doing now. I think you said you're a professional speaker.
Yes, I've been a professional speaker since 1984. I actually started probably in 1976. I was doing a lot of volunteer presentations through the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. And back in 1984, they asked me if I would do a presentation in Germany. I thought, oh, yeah, I'll do that. But that was my first paid performance. It was so exciting. I traveled by myself all the way to Germany, and it was a once in a lifetime experience being in a country where not too many people spoke English. So since COVID, I do more presentations on Zoom. Now that we have that flexibility, I'm able to do presentations all over the world. Most of my focus is disability awareness workshops. I go into organizations, corporations, government bodies who want to integrate people with disabilities into the workforce. And I also do keynote presentations. I'm also a communications coach. I teach them how to tone down the anxiety, how to do more effective presentations,
Yeah.
and that sort of thing.
So tell me, if someone wants to get in touch with you, what's your contact information?
Well, I am on LinkedIn, Wayne J. Tuttle, that blind guy, and my website is thatblindguy.ca. So it's ThatBlindGuy.ca.
All right. Excellent. Thank you.
Well, I certainly can say you have a gift for this.
Thank you.
You have a podcast that is totally different. I love your intro and extra with the footsteps
Oh, thanks.
and the sound effects that you put underneath and the music in there is just incredible.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. It's been a whole learning experience.
Well, count me in as your listener.
Yay, thank you. And I'll just keep building and chipping away. That's how things are made, right? Just slow progress.
Oh, you're doing a fantastic job.
Thank you. We'll keep in touch and I'll let you know as soon as this is on the production board, ready to
Yeah.
at least start to get going out. It'll be, like I said, several months. So, yeah, thank you for sharing your story and for putting yourself out there. And
Yeah, my pleasure.
all right,
All right, we'll be in touch.
talk to you again soon.
Take care.
Bye. Thank you so much to Wayne for sharing your story. We'll share information in our show notes for Wayne Tuttle's website, thatblindguy.ca. Thank you to MJ Jefferson for our production and creative partnership. Please use our new audio recording feature to share your thoughts and make some connections around the world with our community. You can also contact us at storiesofvisionloss@gmail.com. And thank you for listening.